My name is Ruth Langston. I'm 74. I live in a quiet town, have 2 kids, 5 grandkids, and a husband named Frank. The same Frank who used to sleep under the overpass and ask for spare change at the gas station. People still stare when we walk down Main Street holding hands. I can see them whispering behind their coffee cups at Marge's diner. That's her, the woman who got knocked up by that homeless guy. And you know what? I just smile and hold Frank's wrinkled hand a little tighter. If they only knew how this man saved me in more ways than one. Our town has a long memory and even longer tongues. 40 years later, and they still can't believe that respectable Ruth Langston chose the town drunk over her upstanding first husband. Funny how people see what they want to see, isn't it? I've never told this story properly. Not the whole thing anyway. My granddaughter Emily convinced me to share it. "Grandma," she said, "people need to hear stories like yours. Stories about second chances and seeing the person behind the label." So here I am, with my arthritis hands and fading memory, ready to tell you how it all started. And let me warn you, it ain't pretty at first. But if you've ever been judged for loving the wrong person, stay with me. Because sometimes the most beautiful gardens grow from the rockiest soil. Joe Hartman. That was the name of my first husband. The name that used to make my stomach twist into knots whenever I heard his truck pulling into our driveway. He wasn't always a monster. That's the thing about monsters. They don't show their teeth right away. I met Joe at the diner where I worked. I was just 20. Pouring coffee and serving apple pie to truckers and locals. Joe came in every Tuesday, always sat in my section, always tipped well. He wore pressed shirts, had a good job at the factory, and drove a shiny blue pickup truck that made all the other waitresses jealous when he started asking for me specifically. "Ruth," my manager would call out, "you're regulars here," and I'd feel special, important. A pretty girl from the wrong side of the tracks getting attention from a man with prospects. It felt like winning the lottery. We dated for 6 months before he proposed. My mama warned me it was too fast. But what did she know about love? She'd been alone since Daddy left when I was 12. I thought I knew better. The wedding was small but nice. White dress from the discount store, reception at the VFW hall, honeymoon at a motel by the lake. The first slap came 3 months later. I'd burned his meatloaf, just let it in the oven too long while I was on the phone with my sister. The sound of his hand against my cheek echoed in our little kitchen like a gunshot. "I work all day to pay for this food," he said, his voice eerily calm. "And you can't even cook it right." I remember standing there, hand to my burning face, too shocked to cry. He left the room, came back 10 minutes later with flowers from our backyard and tears in his eyes. "Baby, I'm so sorry. It's just been a rough day at work. The foreman's riding me hard. You know I'd never hurt you on purpose." He held me tight, kissed my forehead. "I love you too much." I believed him. Lord help me, I believed him. That's how it starts, you know. Not with daily beatings or broken bones. It starts with one sorry, one excuse, one promise it'll never happen again. Then 2 weeks of walking on eggshells before the next explosion. Then it's a week between incidents. Then days. By our 2nd anniversary, I had mastered the art of covering bruises with makeup. I knew exactly how much foundation to apply over a black eye, how to style my hair to hide the bald spot where he'd pulled out a clump in anger, how to wear high-necked blouses to cover the fingerprints on my throat. "Why don't you just leave him?" people ask now, like it's the simplest thing in the world. Those people have never been afraid to fall asleep in their own beds. They've never calculated exactly how many minutes it takes to get dinner on the table so it's not too hot, not too cold, but exactly right. They've never had to hand over every paycheck, beg for grocery money, or hide emergency cash in the bottom of a tampon box because it's the one place he'd never look. And the shame. Good Lord, the shame of it all. In our town, divorce was scandalous enough, but admitting your husband beat you? That was admitting you'd failed as a woman, failed to make him happy, failed to be good enough. Plus, Joe was respected in town. He coached Little League, he volunteered with the church youth group, he helped old Mrs. Peterson fix her porch steps. "Such a nice young man," they'd say. "Ruth is so lucky." If I showed up at church with sunglasses covering my eyes, people assumed I was hungover, not hiding Joe's handiwork. If I winced when someone hugged me too tight, they thought I was being standoffish, not protecting cracked ribs. So I stayed. For 5 years I stayed, became smaller and smaller, quieter and quieter. Learned to move through my own house like a ghost, trying not to disturb the air around him. I stopped singing while I cleaned, stopped wearing bright colors that might irritate him, stopped having opinions about anything more controversial than the weather. We never had children, thank God. My body seemed to know better than my brain. I miscarried twice. Joe blamed me for that too, said I wasn't woman enough to carry his son. I started taking birth control pills in secret, hiding them in my box of feminine products. The thought of bringing a child into that house made me physically ill. I had one friend who suspected, Marlene from the diner. She'd been through it herself with her first husband. She'd see the makeup caked a little too thick, notice how I changed in the bathroom stall instead of the open locker room before shifts. One day, she slipped me a piece of paper with a phone number on it. "Women's Shelter in Greenwood," she whispered, "just in case." I kept that paper for 2 years, folded so many times it started falling apart at the creases. I never called, but knowing it was there, tucked in my wallet behind my library card, gave me a strange comfort. A door, even if I wasn't brave enough to open it. The night everything changed was a Tuesday in September. Hot for that time of year, windows open to catch any breeze. Joe had been drinking since he got home from work. Not unusual. He'd lost his job at the factory the week before, blamed affirmative action and those people taking good white men's jobs. He'd been even more unpredictable than usual, the smallest thing setting him off. That night, it was chicken soup. I'd made it from scratch, his mother's recipe. But he said it didn't taste right, threw the bowl against the wall. Chicken and vegetables and broken ceramic everywhere. "You can't even make soup right," he said, standing up from the table. "What good are you?" I should have kept quiet, should have apologized, cleaned up the mess, made something else. But something in me snapped. Maybe it was the heat, or the accumulated weight of 5 years of fear, or just the absurdity of apologizing for soup. "Your mother's recipe is bland anyway," I said, barely above a whisper, but in our house, it might as well have been a scream. The look on his face, I'll never forget it. Like I'd transformed into someone unrecognizable, someone who talked back, someone dangerous. He came at me fast, fist already raised. I ducked, but not quick enough. His knuckles caught my temple, sent me sprawling. Then his boot caught my ribs, once, twice. I tasted blood, felt something crack inside. "I'll teach you to disrespect my mother," he growled, reaching for his belt. In that moment, something clicked in my brain. A voice clear as day. "If you don't leave now, you're going to die in this kitchen." While he was fumbling with his belt, drunk and unsteady, I scrambled up and ran. No shoes, no purse, just the clothes on my back and blood running down my face. I ran out the back door, across our yard, through Mrs. Peterson's garden, and kept running. I didn't know where I was going, just away. Away from the house, away from Joe, away from the life that was killing me one day at a time. All I knew was that I wasn't going back. Not this time, not ever. And that's how I ended up, bloody and barefoot, at the all-night gas station on Route 16, where a homeless man named Frank was about to change my life forever. The Sunoco gas station on Route 16 was the kind of place most people in town avoided after dark. Truckers, drifters, and the occasional teenager buying cigarettes with a fake ID. That was the usual nighttime crowd. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, making everything look sickly and unreal, like being underwater in a swimming pool. I burst through the doors, panting, blood trickling down my face. The night clerk, a pimply kid named Donnie who couldn't have been more than 19, looked up from his magazine, eyes widening. "Holy shit, lady, you okay?" I shook my head, unable to speak through the pain and panic. My ribs screamed with every breath. I could taste blood where I'd bitten the inside of my cheek when Joe hit me. "Should I call the cops?" Donnie asked, reaching for the phone. "No," I managed to gasp out. Cops in our town knew Joe, drank with him, went fishing with him on weekends. "No police, please." Donnie looked uncertain, the phone halfway to his ear. "You need a hospital?" The bell over the door jingled, and I nearly jumped out of my skin, certain it was Joe. But it was just a tall man in a tattered army jacket, beard wild and untrimmed, carrying a small paper bag. He stopped when he saw me, taking in the scene, me trembling by the counter, blood on my face, Donnie frozen with the phone. "Bathroom?" the man asked, in a deep, gravelly voice. Donnie pointed to the back, still staring at me. The bearded man didn't move toward the bathroom. Instead, he set his bag on the counter and pulled out a small bottle of water and a relatively clean bandana from his pocket. "Mind if I help?" he asked me directly, keeping his distance, hands visible, like he was approaching a wounded animal. I nodded, not knowing why I trusted him. Maybe because I had nothing left to lose. He dampened the bandana with water and gently, so gently, dabbed at the cut on my forehead. His hands were large and calloused, but steady. Up close, I could smell the mix of sweat, dirt, and, yes, alcohol on him. But his eyes were clear, kind, a deep brown that seemed to hold a universe of understanding. "Husband?" he asked simply. I nodded again, wincing as he cleaned the wound. Figured. My sister had a man like that, used to patch her up too. "I'm not going back," I whispered, my voice cracking. "Good," he said firmly. "Don't." The bell jingled again, and this time it was Joe. His truck had pulled up outside, headlights flooding the store. He stumbled in, clearly drunk, eyes wild with rage when he spotted me. "There you are, you ungrateful bitch," he slurred, lurching forward. The bearded man turned, positioning himself between me and Joe. He didn't say anything, didn't move, just stood there, a human wall. Joe stopped, surprised to find someone standing in his way. "Move, buddy. That's my wife. She doesn't want to go with you," the man said calmly. Joe laughed, an ugly sound. "What is this? My wife and a fucking bum? Get out of my way before I make you." The bearded man still didn't move. "You should leave now." Joe's face contorted with rage. He lunged forward, fist raised. But the bearded man was faster, sidestepping with surprising agility for someone who looked so worn down. Joe stumbled off balance, and the man simply placed a hand on Joe's chest, pushing him back gently but firmly. "You've been drinking," the man said, his voice still calm. "You're in no condition to drive, and if you touch this woman again, I'll have to intervene in a way neither of us wants." There was something in his tone, not threatening exactly, but absolutely certain, that made Joe hesitate. His eyes darted from the man to me, then to Donnie, who had finally found the courage to pick up the phone. "I'm calling the cops," Donnie announced, finger hovering over the buttons. Joe spat on the floor. "Keep the bitch," he growled at the bearded man. "She's damaged goods anyway." He turned and staggered out, truck engine roaring to life, tires squealing as he peeled out of the parking lot. The three of us stood in silence for a moment, the fluorescent lights humming overhead. "Thank you," I finally said to the bearded man, my voice small. He shrugged. "No man should hit a woman." "He'll be back," I said, reality setting in. "When he sobers up. He always comes back." "You got somewhere to go?" the man asked. I thought about it. My family lived 3 states away. The few friends I had in town were really Joe's friends. The women's shelter Marlene told me about was in Greenwood, 30 miles away, and I had no car, no money, not even shoes on my feet. "No," I admitted. The bearded man thought for a moment. "There's a church about a mile down the road. Pastor lets me sleep in the back room sometimes when it gets cold. He's a good man. Might help you out too." "I can drive you," Donnie offered, surprising me. "My shift ends in 10 minutes. Boss won't mind if I leave a little early considering." I looked at them both. This gas station clerk I barely knew and this homeless man I'd just met, showing me more kindness than I'd seen in years. It made my throat tight with emotion. "I don't even know your name," I said to the bearded man. "Frank," he said simply. "Frank Donovan." "Ruth?" I replied. "Ruth Hartman, though I don't think I want to be a Hartman much longer." Frank nodded, understanding in those deep brown eyes. Donnie closed up the gas station early, and we piled into his rusty Chevy Nova, me in the passenger seat, Frank in the back. As we pulled away, I caught a glimpse of myself in the side mirror. blood in my hair, eye swelling shut, wearing a house dress with no shoes. I barely recognized myself. Pastor Mike at the First Methodist was indeed a good man. He didn't ask too many questions when we showed up at his door past midnight. Just took one look at my face and ushered us into the church basement where there was a small room with a cot and a bathroom. "It's not much," he apologized, "but it's safe. Stay as long as you need." Frank declined to come inside. "I'll keep watch," he said, settling onto the church steps outside with his tattered backpack, "just in case your husband comes looking." "You don't have to do that," I protested. "You've done enough." He shrugged those broad shoulders. "Got nowhere else to be." Pastor Mike brought me a first aid kit, some clean clothes that had been donated to the church, and a pair of women's sneakers that were only a little too big. He made tea in a chipped mug and sat with me while I sipped it, hands shaking. "Do you want to report this to the police?" he asked gently. I shook my head. "They're his friends. They'd never believe me over him." The pastor nodded sadly. "I understand. But this can't go on, Ruth. You know that, right?" "I'm not going back," I said, the same words I'd said to Frank. Saying them again made them feel more real, more possible. "I'm not going back ever." "Good," Pastor Mike said, echoing Frank's response. "You can stay here until we figure something out. Get some rest now." I slept fitfully on the narrow cot, jumping at every sound, half expecting Joe to burst through the door. But morning came, and with it, sunlight through the small basement window. And sitting outside on the church steps, exactly where he'd been the night before, was Frank, keeping watch, just like he promised. That's the thing about Frank that I came to learn over time. When he gave his word, he kept it. Unlike Joe, who made promises like they were penny candy, cheap, sweet, and quickly forgotten. Looking back now, I realize that night at the gas station was the first time in years that a man had looked at me and seen a human being instead of a possession. Frank didn't know me, didn't want anything from me. He just saw someone in trouble and decided to help. And that, my dears, was just the beginning of how a homeless man at a gas station became the love of my life. I stayed at that church basement for 2 weeks. Pastor Mike was true to his word. He didn't press me to leave or call the police or do anything I wasn't ready for. He brought me meals, checked on my healing bruises, and let me help around the church to keep my mind busy. Joe showed up on the 3rd day, banging on the church doors, demanding to see me. Pastor Mike stood his ground, told him I wasn't there. It wasn't exactly a lie. I was hiding in the supply closet, heart hammering so loud I was sure Joe could hear it through the walls. "She's my wife," I heard him shout. "You have no right to keep her from me." "This is God's house," Pastor Mike replied calmly, "and I don't recall seeing you here on Sundays. Now please leave before I call the authorities." Joe left, but not before threatening to burn the place down. I spent the next few nights barely sleeping, jumping at every creak and groan of the old building. And every night, Frank was there. Not inside. He refused to come in, said the walls made him nervous after so long outdoors. But he was always nearby, sometimes on the steps, sometimes under the oak tree in the churchyard, keeping watch. On the 4th day, I brought him a sandwich for lunch. Ham and cheese on white bread with some potato chips and an apple. Nothing special, but you'd think I'd handed him a 5-course meal. "Thank you, ma'am," he said, accepting it with careful hands. "Please, call me Ruth," I insisted, sitting on the steps beside him. "After what you did for me, we shouldn't stand on formality." He nodded, taking a small, almost delicate bite of the sandwich. I noticed he ate slowly, savoring each mouthful like it might be his last. It broke my heart a little. "Why are you still here, Frank?" I asked after a while. "You don't have to keep guarding me." He finished chewing before answering. "Nothing better to do, I guess." But I sensed there was more to it than that. Something in the way his eyes scanned the street periodically, alert for danger. The way he positioned himself slightly in front of me on the steps, as if ready to move between me and any threat. We fell into a routine after that. I'd bring him meals, and we'd sit together on the church steps or under the oak tree. At first, we didn't talk much. Just sat in comfortable silence, me slowly feeling safer in the world again, him seemingly content with quiet company. Then, bit by bit, words started to flow. "You always been in Millfield?" I asked one evening as the sun was setting, painting the church in golden light. Frank shook his head. Passing through? Been on the road about 3 years now. Where you from originally? Knoxville. Born and raised. I smiled. Thought I detected a Tennessee accent. That got a small smile from him, the first I'd seen. It transformed his face, softened the hard edges carved by life on the streets. Yours isn't so different. Kentucky? Close. West Virginia. Little town called Piney Creek that's not even on most maps. We traded stories about our hometowns. His memories of Knoxville summers, fishing in the river with his dad. My recollections of Piney Creek church picnics and the swimming hole where all the local kids gathered in hot weather. Gradually, over more shared meals and sunset conversations, Frank's story emerged in pieces, like a puzzle slowly assembling itself. He'd been a truck driver, owned his own rig, married his high school sweetheart, had a son named Michael. Life was good, steady. He was gone a lot, crisscrossing the country with his cargo, but home was always waiting. A little ranch house with a vegetable garden his wife tended, and a basketball hoop for Michael. Then came the accident. Frank was home for once, but Michael had gone fishing with friends. The boy was 16, responsible. But the other kid driving, not so much. Car went into the river. Only 2 of the 4 boys made it out alive. Michael wasn't one of them. After that, everything fell apart, Frank said, his voice flat, emotionless, as if he'd detached himself from the pain to survive it. Started drinking. Couldn't drive safe anymore, lost my job. Lisa, my wife, she tried to help, but I was too far gone. One day I came home and she was just gone. Note said she couldn't watch me destroy myself anymore. He sold the house to pay debts, lived in his truck until the bank repossessed it. Then it was shelters, streets, under bridges, wherever he could lay his head. Been sober almost a year now, he added, a small note of pride creeping into his voice. Too late to fix anything, but at least I can look at myself in the mirror again. When I can find a mirror, that is. My heart ached for him, for the life he'd lost, for the pain that drove him to lose it. It's never too late to start over, I said, though I wasn't sure I believed it myself. Frank looked at me then, really looked at me, his eyes searching mine. That what you're doing? Starting over? I nodded, suddenly close to tears. Trying to. Not sure how. Yeah, he sighed. That's the hard part. As days turned into a second week, I found myself looking forward to our talks more and more. Frank never asked about Joe or my marriage, and I appreciated that. Instead, we talked about everything else. Books we'd read. He loved Steinbeck, checked out books from libraries wherever he went. Places we'd seen, his list much longer than mine. Dreams we'd had before life took its detours. One evening, I brought out a deck of cards I'd found in the church recreation room. Taught him how to play gin rummy as the lightning bugs came out, blinking in the gathering dusk. You should find somewhere better to stay, he said, as he laid down his cards. Can't live in a church basement forever. I know, I sighed, but I've got no money, no job. Joe controlled everything. Frank nodded, understanding. Pastor mentioned the women's shelter in Greenwood. Said they help with that stuff. Jobs, housing, legal advice. You trying to get rid of me? I teased, surprising myself. When was the last time I'd joked with anyone? He smiled that rare smile again. Just want you safe. Really safe. Not just hiding. The genuine concern in his voice warmed something inside me that had been cold for a very long time. The next day, I brought Frank his usual lunch sandwich, but found him changed, cleaner. He'd clearly washed up somewhere, trimmed his beard, combed his hair. His clothes were the same, worn jeans, faded flannel under the army jacket, but neater somehow. You look nice, I said, sitting beside him. He ducked his head, embarrassed. Library in town lets folks use the bathroom if they're respectful. Figured it was time. We ate in companionable silence for a while before he spoke again. I've been thinking about what you said, about starting over. I waited, giving him space to continue. There's a construction site on Maple. Foreman there said they might need day laborers next week. Not much, but it's something. Frank, that's wonderful, I said, genuinely happy for him. He shrugged. Might come to nothing, but thought I should try. That evening, As the summer heat finally broke and a cool breeze rustled through the oak leaves, Frank told me more stories of his trucking days, the strange roadside attractions he'd seen, the diners with the best pie, the sunrises over desert highways that made him believe in God. His voice was different when he talked about those days, alive, animated. His hands gestured, drawing roots in the air. His eyes crinkled at the corners when he described the giant ball of twine in Kansas, or the time he gave a ride to a hitchhiker who turned out to be a famous country singer down on his luck. I realized something as I listened. Frank wasn't just a homeless man. He was a person who had become homeless. There was a difference, a vast, important difference that most people never bothered to see. And in that moment, sitting on those church steps with lightning bugs dancing around us and Frank's voice painting pictures of an America I'd never seen, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: hope. Not just for escape from Joe, not just for physical safety, but hope for a life with meaning, with joy, with possibilities beyond the narrow confines of the prison my marriage had become. I didn't know it then, but those quiet evenings with Frank were saving me in ways that went far beyond that first night at the gas station. He wasn't just protecting me from Joe. He was helping me remember who I was before Joe, before the fear, before I became small. And somewhere in those summer evenings of cards and conversation, I started to fall in love with a homeless man named Frank Donovan. Pastor Mike had connections at the women's shelter in Greenwood, and by the end of my second week at the church, he'd arranged for me to move there. It was the logical next step. They had counselors, job placement services, legal aid for divorce proceedings, everything I needed to rebuild my life. But when the day came for me to leave, I felt strangely reluctant. Pastor Mike had arranged a ride for me. A church volunteer named Gloria, who worked near the shelter, would drop me off on her way to work. "Everything's set," Pastor Mike told me, helping me pack the few donated clothes and toiletries I'd accumulated. "They're expecting you this afternoon." I nodded, folding a faded blue sweater that was 2 sizes too big, but soft and warm. "I appreciate everything you've done, Pastor. I don't know how to thank you. Just take care of yourself, Ruth." "That's thanks enough." I went outside to say goodbye to Frank. He was sitting under the oak tree, reading a paperback with a cracked spine, one of Pastor Mike's books that he'd borrowed. "So," I said, sitting beside him on the grass, "I'm heading to Greenwood today." He closed the book, keeping his place with a finger. "Good, that's good. They'll help you there." "What about you?" I asked. "What will you do?" He shrugged. "Same as always. Move on eventually, I guess." The thought of never seeing him again made my chest tight. "Did you talk to that construction foreman?" "Yeah. Said to come back next Monday. Might have something for me then." "That's good," I echoed his words, though neither of us sounded convinced. We sat in silence for a while, the summer cicadas buzzing in the trees above us. So many things I wanted to say, but none of them seemed right. How do you thank someone for saving not just your life, but your sense of self? How do you say goodbye to the first person in years who made you feel like a human being instead of a possession? "I should go finish packing," I finally said, standing up and brushing grass from my borrowed jeans. "Gloria will be here soon." Frank nodded, his eyes back on his book, though I noticed he wasn't turning any pages. I was almost back to the church door when his voice stopped me. "Ruth?" I turned. "Yes? You deserve good things. Remember that." My eyes filled with tears. Such a simple statement, but it hit me right in the heart. Because for so long, I'd believed the opposite, that I deserved the fear, the pain, the smallness of my life with Joe, that I wasn't worthy of anything better. "So do you, Frank," I managed to say through the lump in my throat. "So do you." Gloria arrived an hour later in her station wagon, apologetic and flustered. "I'm so sorry, Ruth. There's been a change of plans. The shelter called. They're completely full. There was a fire at an apartment complex in Greenwood last night, and they've taken in several families. They can put you on the waiting list, but it might be a week or more." My stomach sank. A week more of imposing on Pastor Mike's generosity. A week more of jumping at every sound, thinking it might be Joe coming to drag me back. Pastor Mike, ever kind, assured me I could stay as long as needed, but I could see the concern in his eyes. Joe's threats hadn't stopped. Just yesterday, he'd called the church office drunk and raging, promising to burn the place to the ground if they didn't give Ruth back. That evening, I sat on the church steps alone, watching the sky turn from blue to purple to deep indigo. Frank hadn't been around all day, gone to check on that construction job, I figured. I missed his steady presence, the quiet comfort of having him nearby. The night grew cool, a preview of the fall to come. I wrapped my arms around myself, not ready to go inside yet. The church basement was safe, but depressing. Cinder-block walls, the smell of old hymnals and furniture polish, a tiny window that let in almost no light. I'd traded one prison for another, it sometimes felt like. Penny for your thoughts. I jumped, startled, then relaxed when I saw it was Frank standing at the bottom of the steps. Wouldn't be worth the penny, I said, making room for him to sit beside me. He sat, setting down his backpack. Thought you'd be gone by now. I explained about the shelter, the waiting list, the fire. So I'm stuck here a while longer. Frank nodded, digesting this. Actually, I might have another option for you. He reached into his backpack and pulled out a key attached to a plastic tag with a number on it. Got a room. Well, more like a cabin. At the Starlight Motor Court on Route 29. I stared at the key, surprised. The Starlight was a rundown motel that rented by the week or month, mostly to truckers and traveling salesmen. Not fancy, but not terrible either. How did you manage that? Remember that construction foreman? He gave me an advance. 2 weeks' pay for helping clear a lot. It's not much, but it's something. He held out the key. It's yours if you want it, just until the shelter has space. I was touched by his generosity but hesitant. Frank, I can't take your room. Where would you stay? He looked away, embarrassed. It's got 2 beds. I thought, maybe we could share the room. Not like that, he added quickly, seeing my expression. I'd sleep on the floor, or outside, whatever makes you comfortable. Just thought it might be safer than here, with Joe knowing where you are. I considered it. The idea of leaving the church, being somewhere Joe couldn't find me, was tempting. But sharing a motel room with a man I barely knew? Except that wasn't quite true anymore. After 2 weeks of conversations under the oak tree, I felt I knew Frank better than I'd known most people in my life. Certainly better than I'd ever known Joe, despite 5 years of marriage. Let me think about it, I said finally. I didn't have long to think. Around midnight, I was awakened by Pastor Mike, knocking urgently on the door of my basement room. Ruth, you need to come now. Joe's outside. He's drunk, making threats. I've called the police, but they'll take at least 15 minutes to get here. My blood ran cold. Where's Frank? Trying to talk to him. But Joe's got a gun, Ruth. He's waving it around, saying he's going to find you one way or another. I grabbed my few belongings, shoving them into a plastic grocery bag. Is there a back way out? Pastor Mike nodded, leading me through the basement to a door that opened onto the church cemetery. My car's parked behind the fellowship hall. Take it. Just go somewhere safe. What about you? What about Frank? The thought of Joe hurting either of them because of me was unbearable. We'll be fine. The police are coming. Just go. I took the pastor's keys with shaking hands and slipped out into the night. I could hear Joe's voice from the front of the church, slurred but loud, punctuated by what sounded like a bottle breaking. The sound of my past coming to reclaim me. I crept through the cemetery, staying low among the headstones until I reached the pastor's old Buick. As I was about to open the door, a figure emerged from the shadows. I stifled a scream, then nearly collapsed with relief when I recognized Frank. Jesus, you scared me! Sorry, he whispered. Pastor sent me to make sure you got away. Joe's getting wilder. Fired a shot in the air. We both ducked instinctively at a distant popping sound, followed by Joe's drunken shouting. Come with me, I said, grabbing his arm. Please. Frank hesitated for only a second before nodding. We climbed into the Buick, and I started the engine, wincing at the sound. But Joe was making enough noise at the front of the church that he didn't hear us slip away down the back road. Where to? I asked as we hit the main highway, my hands still trembling on the steering wheel. Starlight, Frank said. Route 29. No one will look for you there. The Starlight Motor Court was everything I expected. Faded neon sign, single-story row of small cabins, gravel parking lot with patches of stubborn weeds pushing through. But it was clean enough, and most importantly, it wasn't anywhere Joe would think to look for me. Room 8 was at the far end of the row. Frank unlocked the door and flipped on the light. 2 narrow beds with faded floral bedspreads, a small table with 2 chairs, tiny bathroom with a shower stall, wood-paneled walls adorned with generic landscapes in cheap frames. "It's not much," Frank said apologetically. "It's perfect," I replied, meaning it. After the church basement and 5 years in Joe's house, this shabby little motel room felt like freedom. I called Pastor Mike from the room phone to let him know we were safe. The police had come, he told me, and taken Joe away, but only for public intoxication. He'd be out in the morning. "Stay where you are for now," Pastor Mike advised. "I'll call the shelter again tomorrow, see if there's any progress." After I hung up, Frank and I sat at the little table, the events of the night finally catching up to us. I was physically and emotionally exhausted, running on pure adrenaline for hours. "You should get some sleep," Frank said, nodding toward one of the beds. "I'll take the floor." "Don't be ridiculous," I said. "There are 2 beds. I don't want you to feel uncomfortable." "Frank," I said, looking him in the eye, "after what you've done for me, sharing a room with 2 separate beds is the least of my concerns." He nodded, the ghost of a smile on his lips. "Guess that makes sense." We settled into our respective beds, both still fully clothed, the lamp between us left on. Neither of us seemed ready for darkness yet. "Thank you," I said into the quiet room, "for everything." "Anyone would have done the same," he replied. "No," I said firmly, "they wouldn't. Trust me on that." We talked a little more, about the construction job he was starting Monday, about my plans to look for work in Greenwood once I got to the shelter, about anything except Joe and the gun, and how close we'd all come to real disaster tonight. Eventually, Frank's voice grew drowsy, his sentences trailing off. Soon his breathing deepened into sleep. I watched him for a while. This man who had appeared in my life at exactly the right moment. This broken soul who had somehow found the strength to help mend my own brokenness. In the soft glow of the bedside lamp, with the distant hum of traffic on Route 29 and the gentle rhythm of Frank's breathing, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not happiness exactly. Too much had happened for that. But a quieting of the constant fear, a softening of the perpetual vigilance. And as I finally drifted toward sleep, I had a thought that should have frightened me, but somehow didn't. I didn't want to go to the shelter in Greenwood. I didn't want to leave Frank behind. What that meant, what it might lead to, those were questions for tomorrow. For tonight, it was enough to be safe, to be away from Joe, to be in this shabby little motel room with a man who asked for nothing but offered everything. I ended up staying at the Starlight for 2 weeks, not the couple of days I'd initially planned. Pastor Mike called daily with updates. The shelter was still full. Joe was out of jail, but had been served with a temporary restraining order. The church was pressing charges for the broken windows and bullet hole in the sign. Frank started his construction job that Monday. He'd leave early, dressed in the cleanest clothes he had, and return in the evening covered in dust and sweat, but with a quiet pride I hadn't seen in him before. The work was hard, clearing debris, hauling materials, but it was honest work with honest pay. I couldn't just sit in the motel room all day, so I walked to the diner across the highway and asked if they needed help. They did. A waitress had just quit. I'd worked as a waitress before marrying Joe, so I slipped back into the rhythm easily. The pay was mostly tips, cash in hand at the end of each shift. It wasn't much, but it was mine, the first money I'd controlled in 5 years. Frank insisted on paying for the room with his construction money. I insisted on buying groceries with my tip money. We fell into a domestic routine that felt surprisingly natural, eating simple meals at the little table, watching the fuzzy TV, talking about our days. At night, we still slept in our separate beds. But sometimes I'd wake in the dark to find Frank sitting by the window, unable to sleep in a real bed after so long outdoors. I'd join him, and we'd talk in whispers about everything and nothing, childhood memories, favorite movies, places we'd like to see someday. I learned that Frank had never seen the ocean, that his favorite color was forest green, that he could fix almost anything mechanical, that he had a scar on his left knee from falling out of a tree when he was 9. Small details that filled in the outline of the man who had saved me. One night, about 10 days into our stay at the Starlight, it rained. Not the gentle summer rain that cools things down, but a violent thunderstorm that shook the little cabin. The power went out around midnight. We sat on Frank's bed, a cheap emergency candle from the motel office casting flickering shadows on the wood-paneled walls. "Never liked storms much," Frank admitted, flinching as thunder cracked overhead. "Really? Big tough guy like you?" I teased gently. He smiled sheepishly in the candlelight. "Irrational fears don't care how tough you are." "True enough," I agreed, thinking of my own fears. Some rational, like my fear of Joe, and others less so, like my terror of moths. "What else are you afraid of?" He thought for a moment. "Elevators, being forgotten, dying alone." His voice got quieter with each item. The last one hit me hard. Dying alone. It was a fear I understood too well, the gnawing dread that you might disappear from the world without anyone noticing or caring. "I'm afraid of loud noises," I offered. "Doors slamming, engines backfiring, anything sudden like that. Makes me jump out of my skin." Frank nodded, understanding without me having to explain the connection to Joe's rages. "And I'm afraid of being trapped," I continued. "Of going backward, of ending up right back where I started." "You won't," Frank said with quiet certainty. "You're stronger than you think." "So are you," I replied. Our eyes met in the candlelight, and something shifted between us, an invisible barrier dissolving. Frank reached out slowly, giving me plenty of time to pull away, and tucked a strand of hair behind my ear. His fingers were rough from construction work, but infinitely gentle. I leaned into his touch, starved for tenderness after years of bracing for pain. What happened next wasn't planned or calculated. It was as natural as breathing. His lips finding mine, my arms encircling his neck, the candle flickering as we drew closer. There was an urgency in our embrace, but not the desperate kind. More like people who had been wandering in the desert finally finding water. We made love as the storm raged outside, the thin mattress creaking beneath us, the candle burning low. It wasn't like the movies, no swelling music, no perfect choreography. We were two damaged people finding comfort in each other's bodies, clumsy and hesitant at times, but achingly sincere. Afterward, lying in his arms as rain pattered against the window, I felt no shame, no regret, just a profound sense of rightness, as if pieces of myself that had been scattered by Joe's fists were slowly being gathered back together. "I didn't plan this," Frank whispered into my hair. "I know," I assured him. "Neither did I, but I'm not sorry." "Neither am I." We fell asleep like that, tangled together in the narrow bed, the storm eventually passing, leaving behind a clean-washed world and two people forever changed. Life continued in its new pattern. Work, meals together, nights now spent in one bed instead of two. We didn't label what we were to each other. Boyfriend and girlfriend seemed too juvenile, lovers too tawdry for what we shared. We were simply Frank and Ruth, two souls healing alongside each other. 3 weeks after that stormy night, I was at work when the nausea hit me, sudden and violent. I barely made it to the employee bathroom before emptying my stomach. It happened again the next day, and the next. Always in the morning, always passing by noon. "You should see a doctor," Frank said, concerned, as I emerged pale-faced from the bathroom for the 5th day in a row. "It's just a stomach bug," I insisted, though a suspicion was forming in my mind. A suspicion that should have terrified me, but somehow didn't. I bought a pregnancy test from the drugstore 2 towns over, where nobody knew me. Took it in the motel bathroom while Frank was at work. Watched as 2 pink lines appeared, clear as day. Pregnant, at 41 years old, by a man who until recently had no fixed address. I sat on the closed toilet lid for a long time, the positive test in my hand, trying to sort through my emotions. Fear was there, of course, fear of the unknown, fear of bringing a child into such an uncertain situation. But underneath that was something unexpected. Joy. A fierce, protective joy that caught me by surprise. When Frank returned from work, I was sitting at the little table, the pregnancy test in front of me like a chess piece I'd just moved. He saw it immediately, stopped in the doorway, work boots still on. "Is that?" I nodded, watching his face carefully. "I'm pregnant, Frank." He crossed the room slowly, pulled out the other chair, sat down, stared at the test as if trying to decipher a foreign language. "Are you sure?" he finally asked. "The test is. I'll need to see a doctor to confirm, but yes, I think so." He ran a hand through his hair, leaving dust in its wake. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything right now," I told him, suddenly worried I'd put too much on him. "This is unexpected. For both of us." "A baby," he said softly, almost to himself. Then, looking up at me with those deep brown eyes, "Do you want it? The baby?" The question made me realize I hadn't actually asked myself that yet. Did I want this child? This new life growing inside me, conceived in a thunderstorm with a man I'd known for less than a month? "Yes," I said, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. "I do." Frank nodded slowly, absorbing this. "Then we'll figure it out, somehow." He reached across the table, took my hand in his calloused one. "I know I'm not much. No home, no savings, nothing to my name. But I promise you this. I'll do right by you and this baby, whatever that takes." I believed him. Despite everything, the absurdity of our situation, the monumental challenges ahead, I believed him completely. What I didn't know then was just how severely that promise would be tested in the months to come, or how many people would try to tear apart what had only just begun to grow. Because a 41-year-old pregnant woman with a homeless man for a baby daddy, in our small, judgmental town, it was about to become the biggest scandal since the minister's daughter ran off with the choir director in '62. And I was about to discover exactly how cruel people could be to a woman who dared to choose an unconventional path to happiness. Word travels fast in small towns. Somehow, despite my best efforts at discretion, people found out I was pregnant. Maybe it was the extra trips to the bathroom at the diner. Maybe it was the way my uniform suddenly felt snug around the waist. Or maybe it was just that peculiar small-town radar that picks up on any deviation from the norm. Whatever the cause, by my 3rd month, the whispers had started. Customers at the diner would fall silent when I approached their tables, then resume their hushed conversations when I walked away. My manager, Doris, started giving me fewer shifts, claiming business was slow, though the parking lot was always full. It all came to a head one busy Sunday after church. I was refilling coffee cups when I overheard a conversation at one of my tables, the mayor's wife and her usual gaggle of friends, living in sin at that motel with the homeless man, and now pregnant, at her age. Poor Jo. Imagine being left for someone like that. Always thought she was odd, too quiet. Well, trash attracts trash, I suppose. The coffee pot nearly slipped from my hand. I stood frozen, face burning, as they noticed me and had the decency to look embarrassed. Not for what they'd said, but for being caught saying it. "More coffee, ladies?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. They declined, suddenly very interested in their menus. I made it through the rest of my shift somehow, mechanical smile in place, taking orders, bringing food, making change. But inside, I was crumbling. It wasn't that I cared what these people thought of me. It was the realization that my child, this innocent life growing inside me, would be born into a world where people had already decided its value based on its parents' circumstances. When I got back to the motel that evening, Frank was waiting with a surprise. A small stuffed bear he'd bought from the dollar store with his lunch money. His first gift for the baby. The contrast between his simple, heartfelt gesture and the cruelty I'd experienced that day broke something inside me. I collapsed into his arms, sobbing out the whole story. His body tensed as I described the whispers, the judgments, the sneers. But he didn't erupt in anger as Jo would have. Instead, he held me tighter and said, "Their opinions don't define us, Ruth. Or our baby." The next day, I received a letter from Jo's lawyer. He wanted a divorce, not surprising, but on grounds of adultery and abandonment. He was painting himself as the victim, me as the unfaithful wife who'd run off with another man. The letter mentioned my current condition and suggested that if I contested anything, Joe would make sure everyone knew about my indiscretions. As if they didn't already. That same week, my sister Marlene called from West Virginia. Someone had contacted her, probably one of the church ladies who had my family's information from back when Joe and I used to attend. "Ruth, what on earth is going on? Mrs. Simmons called saying you've left Joe and you're living with some homeless man? That you're pregnant?" I confirmed it all, too tired to sugarcoat anything. The line went quiet for so long I thought we'd been disconnected. "Have you lost your mind?" Marlene finally said. "Joe is a respectable man with a good job, and you leave him for some vagrant? What will people think?" I didn't bother explaining about Joe's violence, about the terror I'd lived with for years. I'd tried telling Marlene once before, early in my marriage, and she'd dismissed it as normal husband-wife squabbles. She'd never want to admit that she'd encouraged me to stay in an abusive relationship. "I'm happy, Marlene," I said instead. "For the first time in years, I'm happy. Well, don't expect me to support this midlife crisis or whatever it is. And don't come crying to me when he abandons you and that baby." The call ended with her telling me not to contact the family until I'd come to my senses. It hurt, but I wasn't surprised. My family had always valued appearances over reality. Pastor Mike was one of the few bright spots during this dark time. He visited us at the motel, brought us a casserole from the church ladies who hadn't joined the boycott against me, and never once judged our situation. "God doesn't care about social conventions," he told us over dinner in our tiny room. "He cares about love, kindness, and redemption, and I see plenty of all three right here." But even Pastor Mike couldn't shield us from the growing hostility in town. Frank was let go from his construction job. Work slowing down, they claimed, though they hired someone new the following week. I was finally fired from the diner after a regular customer complained that he didn't want his food handled by a woman in my condition. As if pregnancy was contagious. As if poverty was a disease you could catch. We were running out of money and options. The motel manager, Mr. Patel, was kind enough to let us stay on at a reduced rate in exchange for Frank doing maintenance work around the property. But we couldn't live on that forever, especially with a baby coming. One afternoon, I returned from a doctor's appointment at a clinic 2 towns over, where the judgment was clinical rather than personal, to find Frank sitting on the bed, head in his hands. "What's wrong?" I asked, heart immediately racing. Had Joe done something? Had Frank been hurt? He looked up, eyes red-rimmed but dry. "I got a letter from my sister in Knoxville." I sat beside him, taking his hand. Frank had written to his family a few weeks ago, telling them about me, about the baby, about his efforts to rebuild his life. It was a huge step for him, reaching out after years of silence. "What did she say?" He handed me the letter. It was short, typed rather than handwritten, formal in tone. It acknowledged receipt of his letter. It stated that the family had moved on after his disappearance and that his choices had consequences. It mentioned that his ex-wife Lisa had remarried and asked that he not attempt further contact as it would be disruptive to the healing process. It was signed simply Margaret, not your sister, or even sincerely. Cold, dismissive, final. "I'm so sorry, Frank," I whispered, holding the letter as if it might bite. He shrugged, but I could see the pain etched in every line of his face. Expected, I guess. I disappeared for years, drank away everything. Why would they want me back in their lives? Because you've changed. Because you're family. Some bridges can't be rebuilt once they're burned, he said quietly. That night, lying beside him in the dark, listening to the trucks rumble by on Route 29, I realized we were truly alone. My family had rejected me. His had rejected him. The town had turned its back on both of us. All we had was each other and the life growing inside me. It should have been terrifying. Instead, it was strangely freeing. With nothing left to lose, no appearances to maintain, no expectations to meet, we were free to build something new, something entirely our own. The next morning, Frank announced he had a plan. He'd heard from Mr. Patel about a small house for rent on the outskirts of a neighboring town, Cedar Falls, about 30 miles away. It was run down, needed work, but the rent was cheap. "We could start fresh there," he said, "where nobody knows us. I could find work. You could rest until the baby comes." "What about money? We barely have enough for next week's motel bill." Frank looked down, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Inside was a simple gold band, not new, slightly tarnished, but solid. "It was my mother's," he explained. "Only thing I kept when I sold everything else. Thought I might need to pawn it someday, but never could bring myself to do it." He took a deep breath. "I think now's the time." The symbolism wasn't lost on me, sacrificing the last link to his past to build a future for us. I covered his hand with mine, closing the box. "Let's look at the house first," I said. "Then we'll decide." The house in Cedar Falls was exactly as described. Small, shabby, in need of significant repairs, but it had a yard with an old oak tree similar to the one at the church where Frank and I had spent so many hours talking. It had 2 bedrooms, one for us, one for the baby, and most importantly, it had no memories, no ghosts, no whispered judgments embedded in its walls. We took it. Frank pawned his mother's ring, though it broke his heart to do so. The money covered the security deposit, first month's rent, and a used mattress from the thrift store. We moved in with little more than clothes and a few dishes borrowed from Mr. Patel, who wished us well with genuine warmth. On our first night in the house, sleeping on that second-hand mattress on the floor of what would be our bedroom, Frank placed his hand on my slightly rounded belly and made a vow. "I don't have much to give you or this baby," he whispered, "but I promise you this. I will never leave. No matter how hard it gets, no matter what comes our way, I will stay, always." In a world where everyone else had walked away, his promise to stay was the most precious gift anyone had ever given me. And unlike Joe's promises, which evaporated like morning dew, I believed Frank's with every fiber of my being, because when everyone left, he stayed. Cedar Falls was a blessing in disguise. It wasn't much of a town, one main street with a grocery store, a hardware shop, a diner, and a handful of other businesses. But it had something Millfield didn't: anonymity. Here, we weren't the homeless man and the runaway wife. We were just Frank and Ruth, the new couple fixing up the old Anderson place on Maple Street. Frank found work at Peterson's lumberyard within days of our arrival. The owner, Bill Peterson, was a gruff man in his 60s who cared more about hard work than personal history. "Don't much care where you came from," he told Frank during the brief interview. "Just care if you can lift these boards and show up on time." Frank could, and did. 6 days a week, rain or shine, he'd walk the 1.5 miles to the lumberyard, work from sunrise to sunset, and walk back home. The pay wasn't great, but it was steady, and Bill paid in cash every Friday, important for a man with no bank account and a spotty employment history. I took to nesting, as they call it. Despite my growing belly and constant fatigue, I threw myself into making our house a home. Garage sales became my hunting grounds. For a few dollars here and there, I gathered the essentials: mismatched dishes, a wobbly kitchen table with 3 chairs, we only needed 2 anyway, a rocking chair for the baby's room. Frank spent his evenings and Sundays fixing what he could around the house. He patched the leaky roof, replaced rotting boards on the back porch, installed a second-hand water heater when the old one gave out during my first shower in the house. His hands, already calloused from construction work, grew rougher, but he never complained. "It's ours," he would say whenever I apologized for the endless list of repairs. "First real home I've had in years." The baby grew steadily inside me, turning our theoretical future into an approaching reality. At night, Frank would talk to my belly, his mouth close to my navel, telling stories and making promises in a soft voice I'd never heard him use before. "Going to teach you to fish," he'd murmur. "Going to show you how to build things with your hands. Going to make sure you never, ever feel unwanted." Those moments, in the quiet of our shabby little house, with Frank's gentle voice washing over me and our unborn child, were when I felt richest. We might have had empty pockets, but our hearts were full. As my due date approached, practical concerns took center stage. We had no health insurance, no savings for hospital bills. The local clinic directed me to a program for low-income expectant mothers, which would cover the birth and basic prenatal care. I qualified easily. Too easily, a reminder of how close to the edge we were living. Frank worked overtime whenever possible, saving every extra dollar for baby supplies. I found a box of second-hand baby clothes at a church rummage sale, tiny onesies and sleepers, some with faded stains but all clean and serviceable. A neighbor with grown children gave us a crib her grandchildren had outgrown. Piece by piece, donation by donation, our baby's room came together. It wasn't the nursery I might have dreamed of once. No matching furniture set, no professionally painted walls, no expensive stroller. But there was love in every corner, intention behind every modest acquisition. The people of Cedar Falls, while not exactly embracing us with open arms, weren't unkind. Most kept a polite distance, but a few reached out with small gestures of community. Mrs. Wilson from the bakery would save day-old bread for us. The librarian, Ms. Thomas, helped me get a card without the usual ID requirements. Dr. Peters at the clinic treated me with dignity, never judging my unusual situation. It wasn't friendship exactly, but it was acceptance of a sort. And after Millfield, that felt like a luxury. The baby decided to arrive 2 weeks early, on a stormy October night that reminded me unnervingly of the night Frank and I had first become intimate at the Starlight Motel. My water broke while I was washing dishes after dinner. Frank, who had been reading the paper at our kitchen table, jumped up so fast he knocked his chair over backward. "Is it time? Is it happening? What do I do?" he asked, his usual calm deserting him completely. I would have laughed if the first contraction hadn't hit me just then, bending me double over the sink. The drive to the county hospital in Bill Peterson's borrowed truck was a blur of pain and rain-slicked roads. Frank drove with white-knuckled concentration, one hand on the wheel, the other holding mine through each increasingly intense contraction. "Breathe, Ruth," he kept saying. "Just breathe. We're almost there." The next 12 hours were the hardest physical challenge of my life, harder than any of Joe's beatings, harder than running away, harder than starting over from nothing. Labor stripped me down to my most basic self, a creature of pain and determination, fighting to bring new life into the world. Frank never left my side, not even when the nurses suggested he wait outside during the most intense parts. He held my hand, wiped my forehead with cool cloths, murmured encouragement through each contraction. When the doctor finally told me to push, it was Frank's strength I leaned on, Frank's voice that kept me going when I thought I couldn't bear another second. Our daughter entered the world at 6:17 the next morning, announcing her arrival with a cry so strong and indignant it made everyone in the delivery room laugh with relief. "She's perfect," the doctor said, placing her on my chest. 7 pounds, 4 ounces of perfect. I looked down at her, red-faced, wrinkled, with a shock of dark hair plastered to her tiny head, and felt a love so overwhelming it seemed impossible my body could contain it. Frank leaned over us, tears streaming unashamedly down his face, one finger gently stroking our daughter's cheek. "Hello, Sarah," he whispered, using the name we'd chosen if it was a girl. "We've been waiting for you." In that moment, we were complete. A family. Unconventional, unexpected, but undeniably real. The next few months passed in a sleep-deprived blur. Sarah was a good baby by most standards, but still a baby, demanding, unpredictable, completely dependent on us for everything. Frank would come home from work, exhausted from hauling lumber all day, and immediately take her from my arms, insisting I rest while he walked the floor with her. "You've had her all day," he'd say. "It's my turn now." I'd watch him with her, this man who once had nothing, who society had written off as worthless, handling our daughter with such tenderness and competence it made my heart ache. He sang to her, old country songs his father had sung to him. He changed diapers without complaint, gave baths with the careful attention of a surgeon, rocked her for hours when she was colicky. When Sarah was 3 months old, I found a part-time job at the Cedar Falls Library, working evenings when Frank was home to watch the baby. Ms. Thomas, the librarian who had helped me get my card, offered me the position shelving books and helping with the children's story hour. "You have a natural way with the little ones," she said, after watching me calm a fussy toddler during my interview. "We could use that around here." The job wasn't much, 12 hours a week at minimum wage, but it got me out of the house, gave me adult conversation, and added a little extra to our perpetually tight budget. More importantly, it gave me a sense of purpose beyond motherhood, a reminder that I was still Ruth, not just Sarah's mother or Frank's partner. Our first Christmas as a family was modest but joyful. We couldn't afford many presents, but Frank had carved a small wooden rattle for Sarah, and I had knitted him a scarf with yarn from the discount bin at the craft store. We splurged on a tiny pine tree that filled our living room with the smell of forest and hope. As Sarah grew from infant to baby to toddler, our life settled into a rhythm. Frank was promoted to assistant manager at the lumberyard, with a small raise and his name on the schedule. I took on more hours at the library as Sarah got older. We saved enough to buy a second-hand car. Nothing fancy, but reliable enough to get Frank to work when the weather was bad and take Sarah to doctor appointments without borrowing Bill Peterson's truck. Small victories, but they felt monumental after where we'd started. When Sarah was 2, I discovered I was pregnant again. Unlike the first time, this pregnancy brought pure joy from the beginning. We were still poor by most standards, still living paycheck to paycheck in our patched-up little house, but we were stable. We were a family. Our son, Michael, named after Frank's lost boy, was born on a clear spring morning, an easier birth than his sister's. Sarah, now an opinionated toddler, was fascinated by her little brother, constantly wanting to touch his tiny fingers and toes. "Gentle, Sarah," Frank would remind her. "He's not a toy." "My baby," she'd insist, with the possessiveness only a firstborn can muster. "Our baby," Frank would correct with a smile. Our family. A concept that had once seemed impossible, a dream I'd abandoned during the dark years with Joe, was now my daily reality. Imperfect, challenging, perpetually short on money, but never on love. We didn't have a house at first, but we had a home. We didn't have wealth, but we were rich in ways that mattered. We didn't have society's approval, but we had each other. And somehow, against all odds, against everyone's expectations, that was enough, more than enough. The years have a way of slipping by when you're busy raising children and making ends meet. One minute, Sarah's taking her first wobbly steps across our living room floor, and the next, she's walking across a stage to get her high school diploma. One day, Michael's learning to ride the second-hand bike Frank fixed up, and the next he's driving off to technical college in our old car, packed with everything he owns. Time is funny that way, so slow in the moment, so fast in retrospect. Frank and I celebrated our 20th anniversary the year Sarah turned 19. We never had a formal wedding, just signed papers at the courthouse when Sarah was 6 months old, making official what our hearts had known all along. But we counted from that stormy night at the Starlight Motel, when 2 broken people found wholeness in each other's arms. For our anniversary, the kids pooled their money and got us something we'd never had, a real honeymoon. Just a weekend at a bed and breakfast 2 towns over, nothing fancy, but to us it was the Ritz. 2 days with no responsibilities, no work, no worries, just us. "Did you ever imagine we'd make it this far?" I asked Frank as we sat on the porch swing of the B&B, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. He took my hand, his once calloused palm now softened somewhat with age and less physical labor. He'd moved up to manager at the lumberyard 10 years ago, spent more time with paperwork than planks these days. "Honestly? No," he admitted. "I was so scared back then, Ruth. Scared I'd fail you. Scared I'd fall off the wagon. Scared I wasn't good enough to be anyone's husband or father." "But you were," I said, squeezing his hand. "You are." He smiled, the crow's feet around his eyes deepening. At 64, his hair had gone completely silver, his beard too. The years of hard living before we met had left their mark, but there was a dignity to his aging, a handsomeness that only deepened with time. "We did all right, didn't we?" he said, looking out at the sunset. "Our kids turned out good, better than good," I agreed. Sarah had become a nurse, inspired by the kind nurses who had helped bring her into the world. She'd married a quiet, steady electrician named David, and they'd settled just 30 minutes away from us. Michael had followed in Frank's footsteps in a way, working with his hands, but with formal training Frank never had. He was a carpenter with a small but growing business, specializing in custom furniture. Both our children had grown into kind, hard-working adults who knew the value of $1 and the greater value of compassion. Neither had ever known the kind of hardship Frank and I experienced, but they knew our story. We made sure of that. Not to burden them, but to help them understand that lives can be rebuilt, that mistakes don't have to be permanent, that love can truly conquer seemingly impossible odds. The first grandchild arrived when we were in our early 60s, Sarah and David's daughter, Emma. I'll never forget the look on Frank's face when he held her for the first time. This tiny bundle with Sarah's dark hair and David's cleft chin. His hands, those strong hands that had built our life from nothing, trembled as he cradled her. "Hello, little one," he whispered. "I'm your grandpa." Grandpa. The word suited him perfectly, though neither of us felt old enough for the title. Emma was soon joined by her brother Jack, and then Michael and his wife Lucia gave us twin boys, Thomas and Daniel. Our most recent addition, little Sophie, came as a surprise when Sarah was 40, just when they thought their family was complete. 5 grandchildren, 5 bright lights in our golden years, 5 proofs that the love Frank and I found in the darkest moment of our lives had multiplied and blossomed beyond anything we could have imagined. We never got rich, not by most standards. The little house on Maple Street was still our home, though Frank had gradually renovated every inch of it over the decades. What had once been a shabby last resort was now a cozy, well-maintained haven. The oak tree in the yard had grown tall and strong, home to a tire swing that all the grandkids fought over during Sunday dinners. Cedar Falls had grown around us, from a tiny backwater to a respectable small town with a community college and even a shopping center. People who moved there in recent years never knew our history, never judged us for our unconventional beginning. To them, we were just that nice older couple who'd lived on Maple Street forever, who always had cookies for the neighborhood kids and never missed a town meeting. I retired from the library at 65 after working my way up to head librarian. Frank held on a bit longer at the lumber yard, finally stepping down at 68 when his knees couldn't take the concrete floors anymore. Our Social Security checks weren't much, but our needs were simple. The house was paid off, and the kids helped when we let them, which wasn't often. Pride may be a sin, but it's a hard one to shake when you've spent a lifetime proving you could make it on your own. One autumn day, when the grandkids were visiting and the house was full of noise and life, I found Frank sitting alone on the back porch, a strange expression on his face. "What's wrong?" I asked, settling beside him on the bench he'd built decades ago. "Nothing's wrong," he said, but his voice was thick with emotion. "Just thinking." "About?" He gestured toward the house where we could hear the children laughing as Michael taught them some card game. "All this. From where we started, Ruth. From that night at the gas station. From the Starlight Motel. From having nothing." He shook his head in wonder. "Sometimes I can't believe it's real." I understood exactly what he meant. Sometimes our life felt like a dream, too good to be true after the nightmares we'd both lived through. "We earned this," I reminded him, taking his hand. "Every bit of it." He nodded, blinking rapidly. "I just wish..." "What?" "I wish my boy could have seen this. Michael, my first Michael. He'd be in his 50s now, might have had kids of his own." My heart ached for him. For all our happiness, there would always be that one unreachable sorrow, that one wound that never fully healed. The son he lost, the catalyst for his descent, the ghost that sometimes still visited in the quiet moments. "He knows," I said softly. "Wherever he is, he knows his dad turned his life around, made something beautiful out of brokenness." Frank pulled me close, and we sat together, watching the leaves drift down from the oak tree, golden in the afternoon light. Inside, our family, the family no one believed would survive, let alone thrive, filled our home with the sounds of life continuing, generation to generation. Joe died 10 years ago. Heart attack, according to the Millfield Gazette obituary that a well-meaning former colleague sent me. I felt nothing when I read it. Not satisfaction, not grief, not even relief. He had become a non-entity in my life, a closed chapter in a book I'd long since put away. Frank asked if I wanted to attend the funeral. I didn't. There was nothing there for me anymore. My family gradually came around over the years, once they saw we weren't going to crash and burn as predicted. My sister Marlene visited when Sarah was 5, tentative at first, but eventually won over by Frank's quiet dignity and Sarah's exuberant affection for the aunt she'd never met. My brothers followed, one by one, each reconciliation easier than the last as time softened old judgments. Frank's family was a harder case. His sister Margaret never responded to our wedding announcement or birth notices for the children. But his younger brother Tim reached out when their mother passed away, and a cautious relationship developed. Tim's children, Frank's nieces and nephews, now exchange Christmas cards with us and occasionally visit when passing through. Healing comes in its own time, in its own way. Some bridges can be rebuilt after all, it seems. Now, at 74, with Frank at 77, I look at our life with a sense of peaceful amazement. From the outside, we might seem like any other elderly couple, gray-haired, a bit stooped, moving slower than we once did. But we know the extraordinary journey hidden beneath that ordinary appearance. The grandkids love to hear the story, the how Grandma and Grandpa met story, though we sanitize it considerably for the younger ones. They find it romantic, adventurous, like a movie, Emma says. But it wasn't a movie. It was hard, painful, frightening at times. We went hungry some months. We faced discrimination, judgment, rejection. We made mistakes, argued, struggled with demons both literal and figurative. Yet here we are, still together, still in love, surrounded by the living proof that sometimes the most beautiful gardens really do grow in the rockiest soil. As Frank likes to say, with a wink to the grandkids, turns out, the man they called trash gave your grandma the greatest treasures of her life. And every single day, I thank whatever fate, God, or cosmic coincidence brought me to that gas station on that desperate night, where a homeless man with kind eyes saved me in every way a person can be saved. So yes, I got pregnant by a homeless man. And I'd do it all over again, every single part of it. The whispers, the judgment, the struggle, the uncertainty. Because Frank gave me more than anyone ever had. Safety, honesty, and a real future. As I sit here in my rocking chair by the window, watching Frank out in the yard with little Sophie, our youngest grandchild, I can't help but marvel at how life unfolds. That bearded stranger who once cleaned blood from my face at a gas station is now a silver-haired grandfather teaching a 5-year-old how to plant marigolds. Those hands that once shook from alcohol withdrawal now gently guide tiny fingers, showing her how to pat the soil just right around delicate stems. People ask me sometimes, usually after they've heard our story, if I was scared. Scared to leave Joe, scared to trust Frank, scared to bring a baby into such an uncertain situation. The answer is yes. Of course I was scared, terrified even. But here's what I've learned in my 74 years on this earth. Sometimes the most frightening choices lead to the most beautiful outcomes, and sometimes the person society has thrown away is exactly the person you need. Frank wasn't perfect when I met him. No one is. He had his demons, his regrets, his scars both visible and hidden. But beneath the dirt and despair of homelessness was a man of profound integrity, someone who had lost everything yet still stopped to help a stranger in need. Someone who kept his word even when it cost him dearly. Someone who saw value in me when I'd forgotten my own worth. Grandma, tell the story about how you and Grandpa fell in love. Sophie calls from the garden, soil smudged across her cheek in a way that reminds me so much of Sarah at that age. Frank looks up at me, those same brown eyes that caught me at the gas station, now crinkled with age and happiness. Yeah, Ruth, tell her the story, he says with a wink. It's become something of a family tradition, this storytelling. The grandkids never tire of hearing it. Though we've softened the edges for their young ears, they don't need to know about Joe's fists, or Frank's darkest days, or how close we both came to giving up completely before we found each other. They just know it as a love story. Unusual, unexpected, but a love story nonetheless. Well, I begin, settling into my chair as Sophie runs up to sit at my feet. It all started on a rainy night many years ago, when your grandpa was the only person brave enough to help me when I was in trouble. I tell the child-friendly version, with Frank chiming in occasionally to add details or gently correct my faulty memory, as he calls it. We playfully bicker about whether it was raining or merely cloudy the first day we had lunch together on the church steps, about whether his construction job lasted 3 weeks or 4, about who said "I love you" first. The real story, of course, is more complex, more painful, more real than this sanitized version. But its essence remains intact. 2 broken people who found wholeness together, who built a life from nothing but love and determination. After Sophie runs off to play with her new puppy, a rescue naturally, because in this family we believe in second chances, Frank comes to sit beside me on the porch swing. "You always make me sound better than I was," he says, taking my hand in his. "And you always underestimate yourself," I reply. "Besides, it's my story too. I get to tell it how I remember it." He smiles, bringing my hand to his lips in a gesture that still makes my heart flutter after all these decades. Fair enough. The truth is, memory is a funny thing. It softens some edges while sharpening others. The fear and desperation of those early days have faded somewhat, while the moments of connection, of tenderness, of hope have grown more vivid with time. I no longer remember exactly how many days I stayed at the church before moving to the Starlight Motel, but I remember with perfect clarity the way Frank's eyes lit up when I told him I was pregnant, after that initial shock wore off. Some might call that selective memory. I call it wisdom. The human heart knows which moments to preserve and which to let blur with time. As the afternoon stretches on, our little house fills with family. Sarah and David arriving with casseroles for dinner, Michael and Lucia bringing homemade bread and a bottle of wine, grandkids running in and out, the screen door slamming despite countless reminders to close it gently. Our modest home expands somehow to hold all this life, all this love that grew from the most unlikely beginning. Over dinner, served at the big table Frank built when the old one couldn't accommodate our growing family, the conversation flows easily. Work stories, school updates, local gossip, plans for the upcoming holidays, normal family talk, precious in its ordinariness. I look around at these faces, my husband, my children, their spouses, my grandchildren, and feel a fullness that defies description. From nothing, we created this. From a chance meeting between a desperate woman and a homeless man, this entire world of love and connection emerged. If there's one thing I want people to take from our story, it's this: don't judge a life while it's still being written. The woman fleeing abuse in the night might become a respected librarian and grandmother. The homeless man at the gas station might become the backbone of a family and community. The scandal that sets tongues wagging might, in time, reveal itself to be a love story for the ages. Later, after the dishes are done and the family has departed with hugs and promises to call, Frank and I sit on our porch swing in the gathering dusk. His arm around my shoulders, my head resting against him. We rock gently, the rhythm as familiar as our own heartbeats. "Good day," he says simply. "The best," I agree. We don't need many words between us anymore. 40 years builds a language of shared glances, small gestures, comfortable silences that speak volumes. So yes, I got pregnant by a homeless man named Frank. The town gossips had a field day with that one. My family disowned me. His family rejected him. We started with nothing but each other and the fragile promise of new life. But look what grew from those humble beginnings. A marriage that has weathered every storm. Children who became good people. Grandchildren who will carry our love forward long after we're gone. A legacy not of wealth or status or power, but of resilience, redemption, and unwavering love. Would I do it all again, knowing what I know now? In a heartbeat. Every struggle, every tear, every moment of uncertainty, all of it was worth this life we built together. So I'll ask you this. Have you ever loved someone nobody else understood? Someone society deemed unworthy? Someone who saw the real you when everyone else only saw what they expected to see? If you have, then you understand. And if you haven't, I hope someday you experience even a fraction of the love I found with my Frank. Because when it's real, when it's based on who someone truly is, not what they have or where they've been, that kind of love can transform everything. Our story isn't perfect. It isn't polished or pretty all the way through. But it's real. As real as the man who still holds my hand every night as we fall asleep. As real as the family that gathers around our table every Sunday. As real as the love that saved us both when we had nothing left to lose. And sometimes the most real stories are the ones that no one would believe if they weren't true. Leave a comment if you've ever loved someone nobody else understood. And don't forget to subscribe. Sometimes the darkest stories shine the brightest.